Welcome to Recipes for Love. I'm Michael Love, and today I'm going to show you how to use a sous vide to make the perfect London broil. Hi guys, welcome to my debut on Recipes for Love. Ellie and I have traded places. She's now on the other side of the camera, and I'm going to be the one showing you one of my favorite cooking techniques. Believe it or not, I am actually the primary cook in our household. You would think with this being primarily Ellie's channel that she does most of the cooking, but actually I do most of the cooking. When I cook, I use a lot of different cooking techniques and gadgets and things like that. And that's part of what this debut episode for me is going to be about. Now, if you don't know who I am, of course, I'm Michael Love, and I am Ellie's husband. But we live in a triad. And if you've not ever seen our E&M Talk podcast, live cast show, you should go check out that channel. We'll actually put the link in the profile. You'll get a better understanding of what our living situation is like and how it all works, and how you'll see me and Ellie and our other partner Christina in some of the shows that you'll see here. So that's kind of what our living situation is like. They love my cooking, which is why I primarily do most of the cooking. Of course, I have a brand new toy, our RecTech Pellet Grill, and we'll be using that today. If you don't have a pellet grill, and you may want to consider getting one, first of all, because they will definitely enhance your cooking. But any of the things that we're going to do in the pellet grill, you can actually do in the oven. You just probably aren't going to get that same smoky flavor that we would get using the pellet grill. Okay? So let's talk about what we're going to do today. Now, if you're anything like me, when you're going through the grocery store and you're cruising through the meat section and you look at this big, thick steak, you think, "Oh my God, that's going to be good." But then when you get it home, it's a top round London broil. Okay, so they're usually nice and thick and they're huge. But when you get it home and you cook it, they usually end up being kind of tough and dry, and they never really just turn out as well as you think that they're going to, the way that you want them to be. And the reason for that is because the London broil can be made out of several different cuts of meat. Where we come from, in our part of the country, they're primarily made out of the top round cut, and so there's not a lot of fat in it. The meat, the muscle fibers are usually really dense, and so there's just not a lot of liquid in there to cook and to be tender. And so when you try and cook them really, really fast, what happens is all those meat fibers just kind of bind together really tight, and then you just end up with a really tough piece of meat that also doesn't have a lot of flavor. And so I'm going to show you a cooking technique that I use to cook the London broil that makes them both tender and juicy, but also allows you to pump a lot of flavor into the meat and just make them really tasty. It is something that requires a little bit of pre-planning because we're going to use the smoker, and then we're going to use a sous vide. And the sous vide, we're going to put these things in the sous vide immersion bath for 24 hours. So this meal that I'm preparing right now is actually tomorrow night's dinner. So you kind of have to plan ahead for that. We'll talk more about what the sous vide is. That's part of what I really want to do with this episode, is introduce you to sous vide cooking. But first, let's get this steak prepped so that it's ready to go onto the smoker, and then we can talk more about that later. Okay, so before we get started, we want to get the grill turned on. And this is one of the things that I really want to show off about the RecTech grill. It has a Wi-Fi app, so I can literally control and monitor my grill from anywhere. I don't even have to be at home. I can keep track of what's going on here. And I want to turn it on. Now, I could walk over to the grill because it's literally right behind me and turn it on, but I'm going to show you, that wouldn't let me show you how this app works. So I pull up the app on my phone, I'm connected to my grill, It's showing me what the set point is and all that. That's the last temperature that I use. But I want to turn it on. So I'm going to just turn it on. And you can hear, I think you can hear on that the grill has turned on. Okay. Now, I don't want it at 305 because I'm just smoking this thing. I don't actually want to cook it. So I'm going to just hold this down until it gets to low, what they call extreme smoke. That's going to set the temperature of my grill at about 180 degrees. If you're using your oven at home, that's what you're going to want to do, is you're going to want to set your oven temperature at about 180 degrees. Again, you're not wanting to cook this thing, you're just wanting to set the seasonings into it before we actually put it into the sous vide. Okay? So let's talk about what we're going to do with this thing. First thing is, bring the camera in here, I want to show this. When you're picking out a round London broil, what you want to look for is a lot of fat. Now, when I say a lot of fat, I see where we've got a lot of marbling in here. That's what you want. If you can find a London broil that's got a lot of marbled fat in there, and for a London broil, this is a lot of marbled fat, that's what you're looking for. But you also want this fat around the outside edges. We're going to leave that fat on there because I want to make sure that we get as much moisture into this meat as what we can. Okay? All right, let's talk about what we're going to do. We're going to put rubs on here, but before we do that, we need a binder. Now, there's lots of different things you can use for a binder. A lot of people use olive oil. I tend to use butter just because I like the flavor of butter, but you want to start out with some kind of a binder. Now, when I put this on here, that butter is going to almost instantly, because my meat is cold, is going to almost instantly solidify. That's okay. We're not worried about that. We're just going to paint this on here like this. You can bring that in here close. See how that is just kind of solidifying on there. And then I think it's going to fall out of there. Let's talk about rubs. I tend to like to go with a basic rub. A lot of people would just use basically salt and pepper and garlic, which is essentially what this is. This actually has a little bit of jalapeno in it, which is really good too. You don't want to overpower the flavor of the meat. Simple is better when you're talking about beef. But you are going to put a fairly good amount of seasoning in this, because a fair amount of this is going to come off in the sous vide process or cook into the roast. Now, I like to do that. This is, by the way, garlic jalapeno rub from Heath Riles. Really, really good stuff. Jalapeno is a little intense. I also love their pecan rub. It's a very mild flavor, not too sweet. It gives it a nice body, and also gives it a nice, if I can get it to come up there. Here it comes. We just want to get that well coated in there like that. And this is where the gloves come on, because what I want to do is press that into that meat like this. Just push it into that binder. It's not going to go anywhere. And then we're going to flip that over. And we're going to do the same process. And again, with very free-flowing this stuff is. Again, you can't really go wrong with it, because when we put it into the sous vide, we're going to lose some of that, and that's okay. This thing is just balled up in there for some reason. There's a giant ball of it in there. Somewhere that got some moisture in it. Okay. And And then we're going to push that in there too, like that. Now that looks like a lot of seasoning, but when we cook this in, all of that flavor is going to get down into that meat. And that's what we're looking for, is to push that flavor into that meat. Okay. Now, as you can see, the Recteq has started to smoke. Temperature is starting to come up. We're not quite there yet, but we do not, because we're smoking this, we do not need to wait for the smoke to actually come up to temperature. It'll get there. It's going to be on there for a couple of hours anyways. We're going to go ahead and get it on there. So one of the things we want to do, this is a pellet grill, so we want to make sure that it's full of pellets. Got a nice good 20-pound hopper here, more than enough for what we're going to need for today. And then one of the things that I really love about the Recteq is that it comes with programmed temperature probes. Like, I can just literally put this in there and I can track the temperature of my meat from my app on my phone. Again, no matter where I'm at. So we want to get this steak on here. Basically, we're just going to lift that up, shove the screw, grab our steak. And I want to just put this in the middle of my cooking space. And then we're just going to put this temperature probe in there. I want to get it center of the meat, center of the cut, so that I can just make sure that my internal temperature doesn't get too high. We're not necessarily looking for a target temperature here. I'm going to close this so that it'll continue to heat up. We're not necessarily looking for a target temperature here. We just want to make sure that it doesn't get over 100 degrees. And we're going to smoke this for 2 hours. If you're cooking it in your oven, 1 hour to 2 hours is adequate. Okay? All right, so to talk about sous vide cooking, I want to talk about what the cooking process is. The idea of cooking is to get your meat to a certain target internal temperature. Okay? So what's going on in here right now, pellet grill operates a lot like a stove. It's convection heat. And so what you have to do in order to bring your internal temperature of your meat up to a certain temperature, you have to cook with air. You have to heat the air around the meat in order to bring the temperature of your meat up. You have to make because air is not an efficient heating medium, you have to actually make the air hotter than what you want the internal temperature. So right now, the temperature of this is set at 180 degrees. If I left this alone indefinitely, eventually that meat would get up to 180 degrees. We don't want that because you'd end up with shoe leather. And it would also become very, very dry as well. So that is where the sous vide comes in. The sous vide uses water temperature to heat your meat, and water is a much more efficient means of heating food because water will hold its temperature for longer than what air will. So you have a circulator. The sous vide is an air or water circulator, and it heats the water and holds it at a certain temperature and just keeps that water circulating and keeps it at the temperature that you want it at. So the nice part about that is I don't have to cook my meat. My target temperature for my meat is 130 degrees, thereabout. Medium rare for beef. With the sous vide, I can set the temperature at 130. I'm actually going to set it for about 131 degrees for safe temperature. But I can set it for 131 degrees, and it's going to bring that meat up to 130 degrees and no more. It can't cook any hotter than 130 degrees because I'm not applying any more heat than that to it. So I can literally cook this meat at 130, and it'll hold it at 130 degrees for days. And that is what the sous vide is. Now, the difference between a sous vide and, say, a crock pot is that the sous vide, we're going to pack our food into a plastic bag, a food-safe plastic bag, so that the water doesn't penetrate the meat. We just want the temperature to penetrate the meat. Okay? Now, that is the difference between sous vide cooking and cooking with direct heat or cooking with convection heat. So that's what I know about sous vide cooking. I'm not an expert. It's just what I have learned. Let's talk about food safe temperatures for a minute. If we were cooking this steak on the grill, and I tend to like my meat a little bit more toward the rarer side of medium. So if I were cooking this on the grill, I would cook it to an internal temperature of probably about 127 degrees, which would give me a nice firm meat all the way through that would still be pink and juicy and delicious. But because we're going to cook this for a long cook, you have to go above 131 degrees or at 131 degrees or more, so that you're not basically breeding bacteria. That meat has to go from refrigerated temperature, 40 degrees or less, to 131 degrees within 4 hours, or else you start breeding unsafe bacteria. So my phone actually just notified me, because I have my app for my grill, that the temperature probe is actually reading at 115 degrees, and we definitely don't want this thing to go over 120 degrees. It got there a little faster than what I wanted it to, but it's still been in there for pretty close to 2 hours, so we're good to go. So you can see on the app, this is the app for the RecTech, and it shows my set point is set for low. It's the lowest temperature that it'll go. The actual internal temperature of the grill is 180 degrees, and the probe that I've inserted into the meat is 115 degrees. And so it'll actually track this. The other cool thing is I can actually look at it in a chart mode, where it'll actually show me over time what those temperatures have done. So I'll be able to see if my grill dropped off in temperature or whatever, anything like that. Super cool. And it does this wherever. We had actually left and gone to the store after we put this on, and I was able to keep track in the store what was going on, make sure I didn't have any flare-ups or anything like that. So that is the beauty of the RecTech app. Let's get this thing off the grill, and let's get it into a bag and get it, and I'll show you how to set up the sous vide. Ready? All right. We want to take a look at what this thing looks like. You can see we've got some nice red going here, and it's just kind of starting to weep. Still got a lot of seasoning showing there. But it is sticking to the meat. It's not coming off. Let's double check our temperature. Just want to make sure. Yeah, that's getting upwards of 120 degrees now. We don't want to let that get any hotter. Yeah, definitely time to pull this thing off. All right, so I'm going to just get this thing off of here. Alrighty. To use an Ellieism. All right, now we're ready to get this thing packed up into our sous vide bag, or into our seal a meal bag. So basically all I'm going to do is just stuff this thing in here. Fold this over. Stuff it in. Now if you don't have a seal a meal or food saver like we do, a Ziploc bag works just fine. So usually I go ahead and put in a couple tablespoons of butter just to help the juices flow a bit. And then I'm just going to seal it all up. Seal. The important thing about it is that you want to make sure that you get all of the air out of the bag, because remember, we're cooking with water. We don't want any air in there that's going to mess with our temperatures. This butter will melt and as it's in the sous vide, and it'll flow into the meat, penetrate into the meat really nicely. If you are using a Ziploc bag, then you're going to want to do what they call the immersion technique, which basically you fill your pot up with water, tuck your bag into the water, leave a corner of it unsealed, just push all the air out of it using the water, and then seal it all up so you don't end up with any water inside. Now, let's talk about how sous vide works. This is a sous vide water circulator, and you can literally put this on anything that your clamp will go on to. I've used it in our sink, like I've just clamped it to the divider in our sink. That works. Any pot works. One year we used the sous vide to cook a prime rib roast, a huge prime rib roast, and we used a cooler, just a basic cooler, and stuck this thing on the side of the cooler, and it cooked in the cooler for 24 hours. So that's the nice thing about this. It's kind of set it and forget it. You don't have to worry about monitoring anything. You don't have to worry about monitoring the temperature of your meat, because the temperature of your meat is not going to get any higher than what you set your water temperature to. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop this into the circulator. I'm going to get up high enough where you can see this. Just like this. Okay? You want to make sure that all your meat is down into the water. And then, outlet here, this plugged in. I'll show you how to set this. Now, most of the water circulators, the sous vide water circulators, are similar. They may vary slightly. I think I'm going to be able to push these buttons with these gloves on my hands. But basically what you're going to do is set the water temperature. So this is the current water temperature. This is the set temperature. 165 degrees is too high. So I'm going to drop that down, and I'm going to set it for 131 and a half degrees. I want it to be over 130 degrees. So I want to definitely make sure I am into that safe zone temperature. And then basically you just start it. So now what's going to happen is it's circulating the water. Can you show them here? That it's circulating the water, and it's going to heat that water temperature up to 131 and a half degrees. And then it's going to just hold it there. It's going to cycle the heat on and off to make sure that our water temperature stays at exactly 131 and a half degrees. So that's how the sous vide works. Okay, so now we have this all set up in the sous vide. Again, we talked about how we're going to set it and forget it. Now, with the sous vide, when you're talking about beef, or really any kind of meat, time is tenderness. Okay, so this meat is not going to cook any more than medium, 131 degrees. Okay, medium to medium rare-ish. It's not going to get any hotter than that. The meat is not going to get any more done than that. But what's going to happen, because we're going to cook this in this sous vide for 24 hours, is all of the collagens and the meat fibers are going to soften. They're going to cook, and basically what you're going to end up with is a London Broil steak that's going to melt in your mouth. That's still going to be in that medium range, 130 degrees. You'll still have a little bit of pink to the center, but the other thing that's happening in here, because we're doing a long cook on this, is all that smoke flavor that we just put into there with our smoker. Normally that hangs out in the outside portion of the meat, but because now we're cooking that, and that's where that butter comes in, it's going to cook all that, penetrate it deeper into the meat. The seasoning that we put on there is going to penetrate deeper into the meat, and you're going to end up with a London broil that's going to be flavor from edge to edge. It's going to be amazing. You'll see how this works. But anyway, we're going to check back on this in about 24 hours. Okay, so now it's been at least 24 hours. Actually, it's been closer to probably about 30 hours, because we wrapped this up yesterday, got it into the sous vide at about noon, and so now it's about 4, so do the math. 28 hours. So we're ready to pull this thing out of here. Now, I don't need to put a thermometer in this or anything. I already know that this thing is at 131.5 degrees because it's been sitting there in the sous vide at 131.5 degrees all night long. So I'm going to pull it out of the bag. Try not to make too much of a mess. This can be messy. And put it on the plate there. Now, I want you to take a look at that. that looks kind of gray and gross and not super appetizing right now. And that's typical of when you take a steak out of a sous vide bag. They usually are gray. This one actually, when you pre-cook it, it kind of looks a little bit more appetizing, but this is not what the finished product is going to look like. So I turned my sear box on a little bit ago and got it all. Now my sear box is really good and hot. It is 1,000 degrees. That's what you need, is a really hot sear option. You can have a cast iron skillet on the stove. If you've got a gas grill, fire it up to max, just as high as you can. If you've got some kind of sear plates or grill grates are a really great option no matter what kind of a barbecue you've got. It's a good option. I'm just putting a little bit more butter on here, and you'll see why here in just a minute. So let's go over to the sear box. Okay, we are ready to put this thing on the grill. So I put butter on this side, and I'm just going to put this side down first, and you're going to see just how hot that thing is. And then we're just going to turn it about a quarter of a turn, like that. Not leaving it on there a really long time. We're just trying to get a finish on it is what we're looking for. So while that little quarter turn is cooking, we're going to drop some more butter on here. Make sure you keep the butter on top, because otherwise you're going to get a flare and you might lose the hair on your hand. Like this, just to add a little bit more butter in there. And then take a look underneath there. Yeah, that's ready to turn. We're going to flip that over and look at the sear on that. That is a gorgeous sear. And then just like we did before, we're going to give that 30 seconds to a minute. And then we're going to give it about a half a turn. That gives us our nice crisscross grill marks in there like that. That is what we're looking for. Take a quick peek under there just to see what we got. Yeah, that's looking good. So now when you put these things on the grill for the first time, that grill is piping hot, okay, 1,000 degrees. As soon as you put the meat on the grill, the temperature comes down a little bit. So you need to sear it a little longer on the second side than you do on the first side, because your sear surface is not going to be quite as hot. But this baby, I think, is done. Indeed. Alright, take a look under there, and that baby is done. And that looks a lot more appetizing than what we had before, right? Alright, we're going to give this a few minutes to rest, and then we'll carve into it, and I'll show you the beauty of sous vide cooking. Alright, so this thing's been resting for a few minutes. We are ready to carve into this thing now. Just kind of recap. We smoked this thing for 2 hours. We put it in the sous vide for 28 hours. This thing has been cooking for 30 hours, okay? And we seared it for like 10 minutes. We won't count that. But the temperature, our cooking temperature, never went above 131, 132 degrees, okay? So we are going to end up with a cut of meat that is going to be tender and juicy and a beautiful medium, medium to medium, just a pink medium, which is typical. Remember, we said we can't go any lower than that because we run into the danger of having our meat be in the danger zone for too long. So 131 degrees for over 18 hours. This meat is pasteurized. It's good. It's safe to eat. Okay, let's give it a taste. See how tender that meat is? It literally pulls apart, okay? And, oh, it's delicious. So good. So good.